It is Florida, Georgia hate week. Let's get into it with a crossover edition of Locked On Gators.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a special crossover edition of Locked On Gators and Locked On Bulldogs. I'm putting mine first because, well, why not?
As you should.
I get to do that. I am Brandon Olsen with Clint Shamlin and Daniel Monroe of Locked On Bulldogs, and it's Florida, Georgia hate week. Putting my team first there again as well. And
we see
before we talk about this hate, these days every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business, and that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And I'm just going to lead this off right here because, Clint, you mentioned this earlier on Locked On Bulldogs this week, and I mentioned this earlier on Locked On Gators this week with how the Florida Gators can approach this game defensively. And we're kind of in the same boat here, which is not something that's going to happen often. I'm assuming just with this matchup, but we both think that the Florida Gators are going to come out very aggressively. Whether or not we think that's necessarily the smart thing to do or the right approach to take, we think that Florida is going to be aggressive. And I also think Georgia is going to be more aggressive, by the way. But Carson Beck's been sacked 5 times this year. All 5 have come when he's been blitzed. 0 sacks if the defense only rushes 4. So, and I know, Clint, you agree with this. Daniel, how do you feel about that game plan for Florida there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to have to try to come out and score points if you're Florida. I think defensively, you're going to have to try to come out and be disruptive if you're Florida. And so, yeah, I think anytime you have a big underdog, you're going to have an aggressive game plan. Yeah, I don't know if Florida fans are willing to concede this point or not, but Dan Mullen's been the coach at Florida recently. And so Georgia's the more talented team on the football field. They have better players than Florida does. And I'm not trying to be a dick by saying that. That's just a reality of the situation. And so if you're the underdog and you have less talented players than the other team does, I think an aggressive game plan is sort of what you feel like you have to do coming into a game like this. You got to find a way to be better than you have been if you're Florida in big games. And you got to find a way to try to knock Georgia off of the MO that they've had. Not that Georgia's looked perfect this year, but you got to try to find a way to disrupt the rhythm and flow, particularly of the Georgia offense that we have seen. And you mentioned Carson Beck. And so you got to be able to disrupt rhythm. If you think you're going to be able to do that just by virtue of the fact that Brock Bowers is not playing in this game, I think you're fooling yourself as a Florida fan. I think it's putting a way too much stock in one player, and his ability to impact the game. Obviously a transcendent talent, Brock Bowers, but best tight end to play college football in the last 20 years. But we're like the Georgia offense is way more than him. Carson Beck's been spreading it around a ton. And so, yeah, if you're Florida, less talented team, big underdog, you got to find a way to disrupt, right, Clint?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I do think this has more to do with my perception of how Florida believes themselves instead of actually what's looking on the film, because Carson Beck has been sacked when he has blitzed, but he also under pressure has done insanely well when he gets the ball off. And so it's do or die, which is a lot when you're pressuring the quarterback. But if you dropped quarters like Vanderbilt did, and a lot of other teams did as well, and said to Georgia, hey, take what's in front of us. We'll come up and we'll try to tackle and we'll play the long game. Maybe you'll fumble the ball, maybe turnover battle will happen. And that has happened in games. Those teams have had more success. Now, I do think old DC over Florida does want to make his stamp, does want the mini Kirby or whatever people called him before the season.
You said old DC. That's not accurate.
That was a homage to the old ball coach. That's what.
If you were a guest on the podcast, you'd be the youngest person here.
He'd be the youngest.
Whoa! I'm 27.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So you're a
Well,
contemporary. You're
you're
the
an old
same age.
man,
Yeah.
Daniel, is what you
Yeah.
just said.
Nah,
I
no
think he
lies
does want
detected.
to assert himself, and I think it has more to do with the personality that Billy Napier wants to establish. But I'm hoping Florida does that, because I think that's what Carson Beck hits rah-rah, or hits some guys in the open field. And as Daniel just said, when you have a more talented roster and you're not playing fundamental sound football, and maybe you go one-on-one man coverage, nothing over the top, that's where you have a broken tackle and it's gone for 60. And
Well,
that's where things get out of hand, I think,
yeah,
for a team, or could get out of hand.
yeah. And I'll ask you, Brandon, because I think the distinction is: does Florida want to win, or does Florida want to cover? Because, if you can play Georgia to cover and have a
Ask,
lot of
ask Vanderbilt.
success in covering against Georgia. And so that's exactly what Clark Lee did, at Vanderbilt, and what some other coaches have done. And so if I don't think Florida's coming out with that mindset. I mean, I surely hope they're not, for the sake of the program. You can't come into a game like this trying to cover against an arch rival. And so if Florida's coming in trying to win, I don't think you can play, over the top on everything and let the underneath stuff, go, because Georgia is just going to move the ball down the field methodically and take what's given. I think you have to be aggressive and try to hope for big plays and big swings and momentum. And so it seems like you agree that that's what Florida's going to do. Let me ask you, Brandon, though, is that what you want Florida to do as a Florida fan?
I think so. I've been a little wishy washy on it. I think the right approach might be actually to just be more aggressive. And like you mentioned before, you're a 2 touchdown underdog. You opened as 23-point underdogs. I don't know how that line moves that huge, but whatever. And I know that you guys did say on the show, you were like, hey, I'm hammering it in right now. Florida covering 23.5. That's ridiculous. I think that the
It's
approach is to
absurd.
just be aggressive as hell. Why not? You're a 2 touchdown underdog. You haven't beaten Georgia in a couple years now. Just be very aggressive. You want to establish it. Austin Armstrong, throughout his career, has been very aggressive. Make them beat you at that point. I don't want to, like, Georgia's been damn good when they go with that screen game. Make them try to earn things and try to get pressure there. Try to impact them at the line of scrimmage and try to make plays there, because you've got to try to make some momentum changing plays here. You can't just sit back in quarters and be like, oh, well, as long as we're covering here. I want you to be as aggressive as hell. My issue with that, though, is that even when Florida's generated pressure,
Mm.
opposing offenses have been able to find the deep ball. They've just been throwing it up, and you watch the South Carolina game, immediate pressures against Spencer Rattler, and he just throws that thing up, and it's either someone blows a coverage or Florida just doesn't make enough plays on the ball down the field. So I think that's where the issue is saying, hey, be really aggressive and try to make a play, and then also watching these Florida games going, I don't know if they're capable of making a play at that point.
Yeah, it's really unique. I said on the pod a little bit ago that I actually was maybe shocked isn't the right word, but maybe I was misunderstanding some of the metrics and some of the stats that were given out, because Florida has a competent pass defense, more competent than I thought, and their rush defense actually gives up more explosive plays than I thought before. Is that indicative of this team, or has there been some outliers, Brandon? It is where you attack Florida's defense, the run game, because Georgia's getting healthy at the running back position, which is really interesting for us. Hopefully, Kendall Milton comes back from that injury, but is it susceptible up front, or is that just kind of fool's gold right now? What's going on?
I think right now, just any stats involving this Florida Gators defense are very misleading. You look at the passing attack, and they've been fine, except for the explosive plays that happen every now and then. You look at the rushing attack, and I can't wait to see that matchup, because Georgia's offense really thrived going with outside zone. Like this whole year, they've been just pummeling people when they go that outside wide zone. Florida's been great at defending that. Georgia hasn't been great with gap runs this year, and Florida's been just god awful defending gap runs. You look at the Kentucky game, and they
Yeah.
ran what we call the same damn play a bunch of times, and it kept working. They just kept going
Mhm,
with that wide
mhm.
trap, and it kept working. So I think that's where I'm really interested watching this run game, because where Florida's been good, Georgia's been good. Where Florida's been bad, Georgia's been bad. So I'm curious to see something's got to give at some point. So I think that all stats with this defense are misleading, and honestly, even the offense, because the only thing Florida's been consistent at this year is being inconsistent, and that's it.
Yeah, that's really unique you say that, because I
Yeah.
think if you look at the stats, we got a guy, Dog Stats, fantastic guy, does some deep metrics, and the edge defenders, 4 out of the 5 top graded players on the defensive side for Florida are all the edge defenders. And in the secondary, there's only one, Jalen Kimber, is in the 70 percentile of that, and then the rest are below. So it's really hit and miss right now with a couple of strong spots. As you mentioned, the defensive end of the edge is there for Florida.
Yeah, I hope you know you just gave a bunch of Florida Gators fans an aneurysm by saying Jalen Kimber was the only one above average, because for some reason they hate him. I don't know why, but for some reason they hate him. He's the only one that hasn't been bombed on, where at least, like, if he gives up the catch, he's blanketing the guy. He's just not good not making a play. But like, he's the only one that has just been bombed on consistently, and so they just died. I hope you know that.
Well, I've done my job this week. I
hate to
feel
see
good.
it.
You hate to see it.
You hate to see it. You do.
And we'll talk more about this game in just a minute. Before we get to that, though, I do have to tell you guys about Prize Picks, because for me, at least, it's been a fantastic way for me to make money playing daily fantasy sports this year. And if you've got skills, a little bit of time, you can turn $10 into $250 with a few easy taps and research. It's simple, easy to play, quick withdrawals too, and it's what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. NFL's been great. Now the NBA is back in full swing. Thank you, Julius Randle. Your rebounds, because you miss so many shots. Your rebounds help me. And Jalen Suggs, you are terrible. So less of your points help me too. Free money there. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. And remember that Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy.
Also, want to let you know about LinkedIn. LinkedIn, as we told you at the top of the show, is where you need to go to get the right candidate for your team. Stop messing around with trying to figure out who needs to answer what questions, what is your spirit animal, and what would you color be on a Wednesday after Labor Day? Who knows? I don't know. I don't care. Stop asking these random questions. LinkedIn Jobs is where you need to go, because they are fantastic.
You'll end up with a Jalen Kimber on your team. If you don't go to LinkedIn Jobs, you end up with somebody like Jalen Kimber on you. You don't want that guy. You want the right hire.
You want the right hire. And this just in, we have more of a network than the Sun Belt for that. LinkedIn postings has millions and millions of network folk. It's a big network. Get over LinkedIn Jobs right now. LinkedIn.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Get the right candidate for your position. Post your job for free. That's LinkedIn.com/lockedoncollege.
And now, thank you for joining back with Locked On Gators, Locked On Bulldogs. I'm free balling it here. We're back.
He's just in there.
Yeah, we're just in there. Clint Shandlin, Daniel Monroe, and Daniel, I would like to hear from you talking more about this game, because we got a doozy coming up, and I know that my stomach's in knots just this entire week.
Yeah, it's one of those games we were talking before we went on the air. It's just one of those games that, like, even as a Georgia fan, big favorite in this game, but you never feel good going into a game like this. I know the years. I don't know how Florida fans feel, how delusional Florida fans are. I know nobody can be more delusional than Georgia fans. Let's just call it what it is. But
this right here, this
is
the face of delusion.
Yeah. Even the years when one team is clearly a better team than the other, it's a weird game. It's in a weird stadium. It's at a weird play. Like, it's weird all around. And we've seen a ton of weird stuff happen in Jacksonville in this game. And so nobody feels good about it. But I think if you're Florida, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, but I think if you're Florida, you kind of know who Georgia is, or at least you have a feeling about who Georgia is. But as a Georgia fan, I genuinely don't mean this in a disrespectful way, unlike most of the things I will say today. As a Georgia fan, I don't feel like I know who Florida is. So just you tell me, because I've seen some games, right? I've probably watched every game Florida's played this season. I didn't watch much of the Vanderbilt game or whatever.
Yeah, I know.
I have a problem, everyone. I'm here. It's a cry for help, me on this podcast.
We don't
I've
go to
seen some
therapy,
games,
we
right?
podcast. This is what we do.
It is true. That is true. Like I saw the comeback in the offense against South Carolina, a couple weeks ago. I've seen, the quarterback play really, really be at a high level, more so than I really expected Florida to get, if I'm totally honest, this season. And then you referenced the Kentucky game earlier. I've seen this Florida defense absolutely get gutted. They got gutted against South Carolina too, if I'm being honest. And then I watched the offense, like first week of the season against Utah, and I watched an offense that literally could not do anything at any point in time. It looked like you give the ball to ETN and maybe he gets some yards, or else you just punt immediately. What games should I believe, Brandon? Like, who is Florida? What is this team? Are they as bad as they look? Are they as good as they look? Like, what am I to believe?
Yeah, we know what Georgia is. You are right, which is just a god awful piece of trash program. Congratulations, but yeah, still a piece of trash program. And I was saying on that, but with Florida, I think that we know who they are in the sense of they're just gonna do them. Whether it's good or bad in that week, they're just gonna show up and just be inconsistent as hell. That's the only thing they've been consistent as, is that you don't know what you're getting. Sometimes you look at the Utah game that you mentioned, they didn't even attempt to run the football, and they were just like, they stacked the box, so we just didn't even bother trying, which I don't know. I can't get on board with that kind of thought process. And then you look at Charlotte, and it's like, well, Charlotte stacked the box, and we again didn't bother trying against Charlotte of all teams. And you've had games like the Tennessee one where they show up and it's like, okay, maybe they're putting it together, and then they freaking don't.
Yeah.
So I think the only thing you can really rely on this team doing is just being incredibly inconsistent. That is the only thing they're reliable on. I think that when it comes down to it, they're an above average team. And by above average, I don't mean, top 15. I mean, I'm comfortable saying that they're a top 40-ish team in the country. They're not very great, but they do their job. And I think that you see some glimpses, and most of us are kind of just going, well, the young guys are playing well, and so at least we see the process being there, but it's just a wildly inconsistent team, and that's incredibly frustrating, but it is what it is.
Like, I just want to push a little bit further. Like, whose fault is that? As a Florida fan, like, whose fault is that?
Everyone, mostly the offensive line, because I think that you mentioned, you see ETN, and maybe he can make a man miss, make a few plays here and there. You watch Graham Mertz when he's not running for his life. He's playing fine. He's playing way better than I think anyone anticipated Graham Mertz would play. And I know that Florida Gators fans are just, you need an OC, and that's what you want to get. I don't care who your OC is. If your offensive line isn't blocking anybody, it's really rough. Like, you look at the Charlotte game.
Yeah.
An SEC program against Charlotte, you should be able to just say, hey, line it up, mow them down, and let's go in there. Instead, you scored a touchdown in your first trip in the red zone, and then you kicked 5 field goals after that. So I think that when you look at that offensive line, there is no real greatness there. They've had their moments, like the Tennessee game, but they've been just bad for the most part. They haven't been inconsistent. They've been bad for the most part.
Well, it's good to know that Florida fan and Georgia fan are all together, at least on one thing, and that is making wild speculation about offensive coordinators' fault and the actual length they go to.
Florida should fire Mike Bobo. If Florida would just fire Mike Bobo, things would get a lot better for the program. Let's be totally honest.
That's fantastic. Daniel, what? Yeah. As you look at the Florida team, you mentioned Etienne was kind of like a guy that jumps off the page to me. Mertz jumps off the page. Is there a offensive player, the offensive line having stagnation? I'll be generous. Does bode well for us with the defensive line that's not getting a lot of pressures this year from the edge, as we've commented. What's one guy in the offense that scares you, or one development of this Florida offense that scares you against our defense?
Yeah, I think I'm scared of the passing game. I really am. And I never expected to say that. because of the quarterback. Like I laughed and laughed when Florida signed their quarterback in the transfer portal. You could go back and I would deny it now, but like it's all been recorded, and so you could just go back and find it. But like you mentioned, he's playing better than anyone thought he would. Nobody more so than me. I thought, this guy was not any good at any point. He had a COVID year that he was really successful in, and then like that was it for him. But they're getting some of the quarterback play, and it's not like they don't have skilled guys, on the outside. And so, yeah, that's the part of the offense that makes me nervous for Florida. But it has just as much to do, I think, Clint, with the Georgia defense, and the part of the Georgia defense that makes me nervous. Which, you mentioned, like that Georgia is who we are, and you kind of know. But the thing about Georgia this year is that you're just not getting the consistency of elite play on the defensive side of the ball that you've had in the last couple of years for Georgia. And so, and in my mind, if there is a way to attack this Georgia team, it is in the secondary. And so, while I think the secondary is improving each and every week, and I've seen that throughout the course of the season, I do think that they are susceptible there. And so, yeah, it's the passing game to me that that worries me the most. I guess mostly because one, I do think Florida's game plan is going to be aggressive, as we've mentioned already on this podcast, and I don't think they're going to be content to lean on the strength of their team, which is still the backfield. Both those running backs really, really talented and really good, but I don't think they're necessarily going to go that direction. I think they're going to try to be more aggressive on the offensive side. And so I do think you're going to get Florida trying to take some shots. I think if you mentioned it, Clint, Georgia's not been very good at getting pressure on the quarterback this year. They don't have Michael Williams was supposed to be the elite pass rusher that Georgia had on the defensive front, and he's not been that. If Georgia doesn't bring extra guys, they're not getting home to the quarterback very often. The best pass rushers on this team play defensive tackle. And so Georgia's getting pressure up the middle consistently, but they're not getting pressure off the edge as much as they would like. And, if Graham Mertz is not running for his life, he has been really good. And so, that's probably the area that makes me the most nervous. I'm curious, Brandon, is that the area you try to attack? And then flipping the script to the other side of the ball when Georgia's on offense and Florida's on defense. You mentioned this already. Is it as simple as try to pressure the quarterback, or what's your philosophy and your game plan here if you're trying to attack Georgia with this Florida defense? And how would you assess the Florida defense so far 6 weeks into the year?
Yeah, I think for Florida's offense, I do throw the ball a ton in this game. I just think that's your best bet at making these big plays and maybe creating explosives. I know that I'm also looking at this and I'm saying, hey, Graham Mertz, if you see space in front of you, just run. That's something that Georgia, when they have given up first downs on the ground, a lot of them have been to the quarterbacks, just scrambling and picking that up. So I'm looking at Graham Mertz not being a fantastic athlete, but if you got yards in front of you, take them, sustain drives that way. Throwing the ball to guys like Ricky Pearsall, Eugene Wilson III, just get it to your dynamic playmakers as often as you can. I do wish that Florida had Caleb Douglas in this game, but he is still going to be out with his injury that he sustained against Kentucky. But I think he's just one of those guys who you just throw it up and you just let him go get it. But unfortunately, not meant to be with him. So I think that you just look at Ricky Pearsall, you look at Eugene Wilson III, you look at Arliss Boardingham, and you say, hey, man, just get the ball to those guys in space, allow them to make plays. And I think that defensively, I think your best bet for Florida is to just try to be aggressive as hell against Carson Beck. And you just trust your guys to make the plays where they need to. Like Princely Umanmielen right now, he's got the highest pass rush win rate in all of college football from the edge rushers. He's picked up, I think it's something like 34 pressures at this point in the season. He's right at the top, but he's got 3 sacks. So it's about actually finishing these plays. And I know a few of them have been, he goes for the strip sack, and it drives me absolutely crazy to watch him get into the backfield and then just wet right at the quarterback's arms. But it's about actually finishing these plays. And that's what we talked about even earlier when I say, hey, you get pressure and then the quarterback just throws it up and your DBs don't make a play on the ball. It's about maybe crazy concept, trying to make a play on the ball at some point. Believe
Ooh,
it or
how
not,
how about
bold
that?
strategy, Cotton. But
Bull.
believe
We'll
it or
see if it
not,
works out for him.
I think that's an approach that you got to take here of actually trying to make a play. But Florida's defense, the pass rush has been there. Linebacker play has been very inconsistent, but that was kind of expected with how inexperienced that group is this year. And the secondary, they've just, I mean, a lot of them are young. You look at the safeties, they started 2 true freshmen the past 2 games, but it's just been so inconsistent. Jason Marshall's a guy who every Florida Gators fan and their mother wanted to tell you that he'd be the next big thing. He was the next Joe Hayden. If you listen to Locked On Gators, you know that was never going to happen. Don't worry about that. But he's been bad this year. It's not that he hasn't been the next Joe Hayden. It's that he's been bad this year. So the assessment is just as you get deeper into this defense, it gets worse. That's the best way to put it. Up front, Cam Jackson on the interior. He's the reason that when Tennessee put 7 guys on their 5 offensive linemen, running back, tight end, and they ran the ball there, Florida had 5 in there because they just knew Cam Jackson could handle the center and both guards in that run game. So you look at the defensive line, they've been there. You mentioned before of the top 5 defenders, 4 best are edge rushers. They've been great. But then as you get farther on, they just get worse as it goes. And that's something where if I'm Georgia, I'm taking a few deep shots here. And I'm just saying, hey, if you can't show that you can stop this deep ball, then we're going to keep doing it.
All right. Well, we're going to be right back and find out if Brandon is absolutely crazy enough to actually pick Florida to win this game. That's the question that we're all asking ourselves. But first, I do want to let you know about the fine folks over at FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Gators podcast, the Locked On Bulldogs podcast, and all Locked On podcasts everywhere. They're the only place that the 3 of us go to place all of our wagers on Saturday when you want to hit that over-under, when you want to hit that spread, when you want to make a prop bet, when you want to make a parlay, when you want any action on any game. Brandon mentioned the NBA season has started up again. There is so much to bet on. The World Series is starting. You can get lines on that on FanDuel. So much action on FanDuel Sportsbook. It's safe, it's easy, it's reliable. And right now, you make your first wager. Go to FanDuel.com/locked on. Enter the promo code locked on. You make your first wager. You get bonus bets directly into your account, whether you win or lose. It's free money directly deposited into your account. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. Enter the promo code locked on for free bonus bets in your account when you make your very first wager on FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right. Let's give some picks, gentlemen. Who's going to win this game, Brandon? I want to hear you say it. Go ahead. Who's going to win? Just tell all the people out there who you think is going to win the game.
I am a realist. Georgia is most likely going to win this game. I did just now while we were talking about this bet that Florida will cover the spread. So I do think Florida covers 14.5 points. I don't think Florida wins. And I'm not saying Florida can't win. I know that saying, oh, Georgia's probably going to win means that people are, and I know Clint's shaking his head because he's saying, oh, he's been saying, oh, there's a chance. And he's like, I'm not saying it's happening, but yeah, I think that that's a thing where we have to accept Georgia right now. They're number 1 in the country for a reason. They've had sustained success for the past couple of years. Recruiting classes have been awesome. Florida just positionally is still rebuilding. I think that you're silly to expect a Florida win, but I do think that it's reasonable to expect Florida to cover this game, and it's probably going to be 10-point win for Georgia.
Yeah, you're talking about the spread, and I happen to believe the same thing. We said last week that if it was so that 23.5 hammer Florida to cover that, because this game I think it's a little squirrely, and if it's an over under anywhere near 65, 60, something like that, I'm taking the over in this game. It has the feel to me. Mertz is playing well. You talked about Pearsall. That dude can flat out fly and catch a ball, and he is good in the open field and after the catch. So it just seems to me that I know Georgia fans ain't gonna like to hear this, and we'll talk some more, Daniel and I, and get in our buckets for puke-worthy amount. But it just feels like this is another cocktail party that's gonna be forget putting your hands up, just throw a right hook in my jaw, and then you do the same, and we'll see which one of us stands up. I think that's going to be the feel of this game. So yes, the cover, I could see that happen, and the win going to be. I anticipate this game being 40. I'm going to go right now 26, right on the line of the line, because I don't know. I'm not there yet on a lean, but I'm going to go 40 Georgia, 26 Florida.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I were confident. It's not that I have any confidence in Florida. I don't think Florida's good. I'll just be totally upfront about that. I don't think Florida's a good team. I don't think Florida is one of the better teams Georgia's going to play this season. I think Georgia's played at least 2 teams better than Florida already this season. And so this has nothing to do with the Florida Gators. I just can't feel supremely confident about this Georgia team yet. Kentucky at home at night, Georgia looked dominant. They looked like back-to-back national champions. They absolutely steamrolled a very good team, a team that I think without a doubt everyone listening to this podcast would agree is better than Florida. And so that's the only game. That's the problem. And so I can't feel supremely confident. I feel like Georgia's going to win this game, but how they're going to win this game, I think we're all kind of in agreement. I'm not willing to bet it like Brandon is, because I can't do that and still look at myself in the mirror. But you're not going to see me hammering Georgia minus 14.5. I promise you that. And I probably won't even. A lot of this, like the Georgia money line is like minus 650. And I'll just tell you, normally if a Georgia money line gets under 800, I normally lay a big number on it, because I'm not sure if you're aware of what the Georgia money line has done lately, but it always cashes. Like every time they play a game, it cashes. And so if it gets under 800, normally I'm laying a big bet on the Georgia money line. I'm not even sure I could do that in this game, because I think it's going to be close late. And I think we saw in that South Carolina game, if you get into just like what Clint was describing, a punching match with this Florida team, they've got a shot to land the last punch and, to pull something off here. They're not going to do that because they're Florida. Georgia has a better coach. Georgia has a better team. Georgia is the better program. So I'm going to take Georgia to win, but I don't feel great about it. Nobody feels great going.
Nobody feels great. Let's be real.
Can't wait till it's over.
Yep. Which two teams has Georgia beaten that's better than Florida? I know Kentucky's one.
I mean, Kentucky is definitely one. And then, UT Martin. Have you seen that team play? UAB. It's another Trent Dilfer's doing things at UAB that I think
this man's unserious.
Georgia's got some. I don't know. I still think South Carolina is a better team objectively than Florida. I know Florida won that game.
Florida won that game in South Carolina.
They sure did. They absolutely did. I still take South Carolina's team overall over Florida's, but we'll see after Saturday. We'll see.
We will see, because it's
Shane Beamer won the national championship of being ahead of Georgia at halftime. So
you can't take that from him.
We made him break his foot.
Congrats to him.
We made him break his foot. So
Shane Beamer is having a tough time.
Transitive property.
Year
we
for
win
Shane
the national
Beamer.
championship for beating Georgia at halftime. We made that guy break his foot. So what do we win?
Real quick, that had to have been an old.
You might be ahead after 3 quarters,
right? Because ain't no way you're breaking your foot on a flat screen. That had to be one of them old RCA things, right?
I refuse to believe it was anything other than a Gatorade bucket. I don't care what anyone. It was a full Gatorade jug. That has to be that.
South Carolina's locker room is equipped with 1987 televisions. Like there's 100%. Not a doubt in anyone's mind.
100%.
All right, Brandon, we'll see what happens on Saturday. It's been fun recording with you. Go check out Locked On Gators podcast if you're a Dogs fan and listen to all of the lunacy that Brandon is spouting off on a daily basis.
The deranged Gators fan.
And if you're a Florida fan, you already know what you're going to get out of us, and so you better stay away. You don't want to be in that comment section. Let me just tell you this right now. Stay out of it. You don't want to be in the comment section.
Daniel
And
hasn't
so
even been there the whole week, and
you
he's
might as
tough.
well stay away. We know who you are. If there's a listener right now named Scully Reddy on YouTube. We want to hear from you. It's been so long. We miss you. We've got some great Florida fans. Anyway, Locked On Gators, Locked On Bulldogs. Appreciate you guys, and we will see y'all later.